I've been downgraded on my plan, so I don't have the fancy kind of intro
No
anymore.
jingle? Oh
Oh,
man.
yeah, apparently the cycling podcast business doesn't generate a huge amount of revenue. We're currently standing at $0. So um, actually -$, but let's not get into that. Your shirt will come, Nick, but just not right now. Yeah, so Nick's here to talk about. We're going to do a Tour de France retrospective. There's still one day left in the tour, but it's basically all wrapped up. We want to kind of talk about from the betting angle, respectively, what went well, what went poorly, what we're going to improve upon for next Tour de France, maybe next Grand Tours. But we can talk about the difference there. It's actually pretty interesting from our angle. First, we have a question for Nick, though, which is, did you watch any of Tour de France?
No, I caught a few snippets here and there at pubs, random spots in the UK, because it seemed to be on a lot of televisions at sports bars and stuff here. So caught a bit kind of like through that. Didn't watch too much intentionally though. So definitely would love some sort of high level kind of like recap, like what happened, what did you find interesting, either from the cycling perspective or the betting perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I have a question. I have a follow-up question though. Given that you're in the UK and I'm in Canada, how like was it beside like what was the status? Like you like it's most like out of the 10 screens at the pub, was it like 7, 8 soccer and like one cycling and one pool and darts throwing?
I'd say like if there was like a football match on, the football match would get prime time. But then I'd say like cycling was second after that, and just kind of like in random spots too, just like in shop, like the shopkeeper would have it on just for him to kind of be watching in the shop as he's selling stuff or whatever. So a lot of screen time overall in the UK.
Very cool. Very cool. Apparently, this podcast is number 3 in Slovenia in sports. So shout out to our Slovenian fans. I don't know how much I trust that data point, but I got a message to my business account on that. So maybe we're actually having some impact. Um, Also, before we dig in a little bit deeper on the tour and I give you a recap, we launched the book for the cycling explained. There's going to be links in the show description. You can also search it up on Amazon as in the ultimate guide to cycling. I think there's a subtitle there, enjoying the spectator's experience, something along that lines. I should probably do a better job at marketing my own book, but we'll get to that in future episodes as well.
Super cool.
With respect to the yeah, thanks. With respect to the Tour de France, it has been a great addition. Honestly, I think there was 2 sleeper stages. So you got 21 stages, right? The last one is tomorrow, but there was only 2 that were really like, wow, we're gonna like sleep on the bike basically,
Mm.
and then race at the end. Otherwise, it was raced all out super hard. That's all we heard from the riders was, man, this is hard. Every day was hard. And it's no longer, there was no easy days. This is modern cycling. Like these guys
Mhm.
can take in the nutrition, they can race hard each and every day. And it just made it for a super entertaining racing. So what we would do would we be the best part is like the breakaway formation was so difficult. So right,
Mm.
like I think we talked about how you have at the start of the stage an interesting portion where these riders are attempting to form a breakaway from the main peloton. And that would last, usually, we're talking about on average, that would last about an hour and a half, just trying to
Oh.
form this breakaway. So we're talking 70 Ks maybe of
Mm.
just like some riders are in, some riders are out. Who are they going to let in? Who are they not going to let in? It was just amazing to watch because it's fun because it's like these guys are like marking attacks, they're not marking attacks, whatever, what have you. um, and then even then once the breakaway formed, you're now looking at maybe 100K left in the stage, so you're left
Mm.
in maybe 40K where there's a bit of a sleep, where you can, there's not much change, but then you might have a final climb or something, or someone
Mm.
wants to kick off, or the peloton wants to catch up to the one, so you're the last 60K is super interesting as well. So you're really left with just like 40K. Well, you left with maybe an hour that's like not super interesting, but like of 4.5 hours every day, you're left with like 3.5 hours of excitement. That's a really good. And then with respect to overall, we'll talk about it. So there's three main things, right? What are the three main jerseys are, Nick? What are they?
The King of the Mountain.
Yeah, you got it. That's one. It's polka dot.
That just like overall the yellow, like overall leader,
Yeah, you nailed it. Nice job.
and then
Did you get
like
the last one?
point leader.
Yeah,
Oh,
you got it.
nice.
Well
Paying
done.
attention.
You are learning. You should be waving that flag to get the riders off the start line. You know your stuff. So overall, it was stayed close until stage 17. Honestly, I think it was stage 17. People might shoot me some hate messages, but I got the stage wrong by one day. But anyway, it was a time trial. So Pogacar took. Let me give you a brief overview. Pogacar took um, was it him? Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Anyway, Vingegaard looked really hot one stage. I think it was stage 5 out of the gate. He took like a minute on Pogacar, and they were like, oh, man, Vingegaard's too strong. He's going to run away with his tour. Next thing you know, the next day, Pogacar comes back, takes 50 seconds. They're close again. They're within 10 seconds. Stays like that, kind of back and forth over the next 10 days, like a little bit here, a little bit there, some bonus seconds overall. And so it stayed really close, and they were like fighting back and forth, what have you. And it looked like Pogacar might be ahead going to this time trial, because Pogacar usually has a slightly better time trial than Vingegaard. But Vingegaard just like blew something out of the water. Like it was like I'm not naive. I think the sport's a lot cleaner than it was. But the chatter was off just because there was a rest day before this time trial, and there's a lot of gray area in the sport about what you can do in the rest area, and so he just because his usual numbers are like 6.8 kind of watts per kilogram on a climb. That's like a usually really hard, strong climb. He was like 7.6, which is just like well above average. So he was like a minute and 30 seconds ahead of Pogacar, and Pogacar was a minute and 20 seconds ahead of the next competitor on a 37-minute time trial. So like his level was extreme. And honestly, like I don't watch cycling because I care. If they're all doping, then it's all good with me. I like it's fun to watch no matter what. But it was a very impressive time trial. So anyway, after that, the next day or the day after, there was a really hard stage with big climbs, and he just dropped. Pogacar just said like he couldn't get food in him or something, and Vingegaard took another 5 minutes on him, and so that kind of sealed the deal. But overall, I mean, up till stage 17, you're like, who's gonna win? It was like that's a pretty exciting kind of thing. And this morning, Pogacar won the stage. So it was good, kind of like nice little like yay. Uh, but overall, it was super exciting. There was a good competitor in Gaul uh, who did really well in Tour de Suisse, which was like kind of a month ago. But he showed off just how good a potential GC competitor he will be in the next year or so. He just needs to work on his time trial. That was kind of the shine through of that, and like someone to watch, kind of like a Derek G in the Giro. I mean, the Derek G of, if you want to find the identical Derek G at this tour, was this man called Nealands, um, Chris Nealands. He was insane. He was in the break every day almost. He crashed really bad though a few days ago, and he was still in the break. He just, once you crash really bad, you kind of lose some caliber. But it was fun to watch him and be in the break every day. He never won top 3 or anything, so that was too bad. But it's fun for those guys who are just like really strong riders.
For sure.
And then King of the Mountains was won by Ciccone, who you could probably see him kind of potentially winning King of the Mountains. Going in, he was just like he's got a decent kick. He's a good climber, but it was kind of close, right? Because it's always kind of close with King of the Mountains if the main GC competitor, like a Vingegaard or Pogacar, will win that, just because so many stages end in a mountaintop finish.
Gotcha,
So
gotcha.
it's always kind of like up for debate. But Ciccone did come away with the King of the Mountains jersey today. It was confirmed, and that's good. There was a battle at the start by Paulus, an American, but he kind of burnt out. Like he was wearing the jersey for a few days, but then he just couldn't keep it up with when Ciccone started going for it through the middle days. And then points wise, Philipsen was the number one sprinter going in, and he's also a decent climber. And he won 4 stages. He was by far the best sprinter. Like it was just hard to beat. He had the best train, a sprint train going in, kind of to that leads them in, and it was just hard to beat. Not a lot of teams, because the team has to balance. If they bring a GC team, right, they have to balance between how many will do they also bring a sprinter at the same time, right? Because then you only have so many people for your lead out train for your sprinter compared to your domestiques for your GC contender, and there's
Interesting.
only 8 people on the team, and so it becomes a little tricky, right? So Philipsen didn't have any GC contenders. They were just focused on Philipsen with a sprint chain that worked very well. And so, Matthew Van der Poel, who's, you might hear me bring up his name a lot because he's one of the big 6. He wins a lot of classics in the spring, and he was a lead out man for Philipsen. And overall, Philipsen just looked super strong. He got, I think, he got a little like friend. I don't know how to frame this, but he got a little frowned upon 2 days ago because his team, he tried to block one of these riders trying to make the breakaway. Basically, he like side checked him because he wanted the stage to be a sprint stage, not a breakaway stage, which means like
Mm-hmm.
he wanted it to go to the line so he could win in a sprint, where he didn't want the breakaway to win, and so he was trying to like not let this guy go and try and reach the breakaway, and everyone was like, nah. I mean, in the media and the society, everyone was kind of like that was a bullying
Gotcha.
tactic, and honestly, yeah, I don't think it looked super good in term for him. So that's how that went. But overall, and then I think Mark Cavendish. The other big story was Mark Cavendish. You might hear it in the UK. He's won the exact same number of stages of the Tour de France as Eddie Merckx, who's probably the most famous cyclist ever. And he's getting old. Like I think he's 38, and so he was trying to win one more stage this year, but he almost made it. He came second, but then he broke his collarbone on stage 8. So he might retire, he might not. It's still kind of up in the air. So we'll see what happens there.
And you're mentioning teams. What teams came out on top?
Yeah, team wise, I mean, I think it's going to be Jumbo Visma who takes the team classification. We haven't looked on PCS today. We had a bet on UAE. I think UAE was second, and Bahrain, we also had a bet on was third. But man, we're just taking L's. I think that was the story of this tour that we kind of wanted to talk about. Was we took some L's. Like we were 5x up on our base bankroll before heading into this tour, and we're definitely not anymore. I think the main reason was the caliber of the riders is so high. I think if you had a thesis statement, was that you couldn't count anyone out ever. Every single rider in the Tour de France peloton could have won a stage. They were just like the elite A class of riders. So if you're talking about the Giro, it's not the same caliber of riders. You can count some people out, you can count some teams out, and even at the smaller races, you can count like half the peloton out. And so that drastically reduces your risk of someone else potentially winning. But we had so many fourths, uh, and also overall, I don't think we'll bet King on the Mountain or points classification before starting, because we've talked about this before, but it it messes with that 365's like risk score tolerance, so it doesn't let you parlay most stages when you have too many bets on like overall holistic
Gotcha.
parts of the tour. And so
Mm-hmm.
most of the stages there was too much um, overlap that they wouldn't let you parlay, just
Gotcha.
because
Yeah,
we've
yeah.
talked to people in the industry, and that's kind of how it goes, and that's usually where we make a lot of our money. To be honest, is those 3 to 4 parlays that we can kind of pick out pretty easily. So that kind of screwed us over from actually making money. Um, so yeah, at the end of the day, we were down, and I think it's good to take a retrospective and just think about why. And I think it is honestly just because, man, everyone wanted to win every single day, and it was just you could bet on the people who were probably gonna make the break, but then you're making, but the breaks were so big too. We're talking 15, 20 riders,
Oh, wow.
and you could probably guess 3 or 4 of the riders. Like we had 4 bets on the riders, but then you have 4 bets against 16 other people who could win, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it was hard, and then yeah, and we will call out because it's frustrating. We bet Mahorich we bet every single stage except the one stage he won. He won.
Oh
It
man,
was so annoying. We were like, man, he's like kind of short today. We're not like, we've already put down 4 bets. Like, we bet him like 7 times. Like, but man, he goes ahead and wins, and we're just like, whatever.
that's gotta
That's just
hurt.
how that's just how
Yeah,
this two is going. So consistency, but with respect to the sprinters, there was also some good sprinters who were kind of short. I mean, sorry, who were long, and good value, and so we did well on that. But again, well is not a win, right? So we had some fourths and fifths from these sprinters who were like 151 or 81 or 101 or whatever, who were just like, why were they not shorter? But whatever. And yeah, and so they came fourth and fifth. But again, fourth and fifth doesn't win money. So I wish there was some sort of something like that. And in terms of, yeah, I think we'll think about. I think it's interesting to think about, do what sections do you want to put money down on? Kind of like, I think some of the things that aren't worth putting money down on are like top 10 for these races, like a top 10 finish, rider to win X number of stages, kind of all that jazz. But we will, we'll think about it, and we'll write a little post about it, and kind of we'll probably send it out as a first email. So if people want to sign up on the site to the newsletter, we'll probably be sending out our first one shortly, just with respect to what we could have done better and moving forward, how we're going to approach things. But overall, I mean, like, some of the reason why we do this is because it's a whole bunch of fun. And just like today, let's take today for example, we did win some money on Gall, who took second, I think, maybe over Vingard, or at least a third. But it was, you kind of want. There was this other rider, Pino, who he grew up in the area. He was retiring this year. He was in the breakaway, and it looked like he was going to get caught, but it was fun to cheer for him. And then just because it would have been nice if he won, it would be a nice story. But then you also have fun cheering for the people behind because you have money on the people
mm,
behind, and so there's like that's kind of how we do our bets sometimes, is kind of hedge with emotion as well. So that's also a good way of doing it, but it's also, yeah, I think it's a good way to learn sometimes. So
yes. One thing I want to circle back on, you mentioned because you had some tour long bets, there were some bets like for each stage that you weren't able to make. And I remember at the start when we kind of talked strategy, you mentioned like other downsides to having tour long bets where it like kind of locks your money up. And obviously there's lots of like dynamics that are happening throughout the tour. So would you say this sort of like kind of like prevention of stage bets is another like reason why you should avoid doing tour long bets, or not necessarily?
Yeah, I think there's multiple reasons you just mentioned there. Like it locks your money up, and especially at this level, there's just too much variance in the Tour de
Mm.
France. So when I say level, I mean the Tour de France being the most elite level. We got some recommendations to put down some money mid tour on, and we thought about it like it was rational. Put down some money on Bahrain to win the teams classification because they're still pretty long, and they had no one else in the GC contention. So that means they'd have riders in the break every day because they'd be let in the
Mm.
break every day, right?
Mm.
Because if you
Gotcha.
don't have riders in the GC contention, then you'll be let in the break. And the team's classification is based on the top three riders per stage, their times, and you add them up every day.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
And so there, it made kind of sense that like, hey, they'll probably have two riders in the breakaway every day. But the problem, what happened was the break was really never let to win most of the days because
Mm.
it was too close, and everyone wanted to win. And the caliber of the riders was so high that they could drag back the break. And so being in the break every day didn't really matter. Um, and so I think it all kind of comes back to that core thesis of like, wow, when everyone is so good, it
Mm.
really no one could predict what was going to happen. The announcers couldn't predict. Friends in the industry couldn't predict. No one could predict what was going to happen, and it made it exciting to watch. And so we kind of happily lost the money that we lost. But again, it's like maybe you take a step back when betting on the Tour de France. It's also it's also just there's so much more media attention. You lose the benefit of your knowledge with respect to like the insider knowledge you have or etc like that, and there's just so much more people betting, and the odds are more in line with what like there's less variance in the odds. It's kind of like the NFL, where if someone sneezes on the sidelines, you'll know about it, and the odds are not. We've been listening to some other podcasts with respect to betting, and it's like the NHL has less media attention, less people. Like we're Canadians, we know all about it, but like if you're American, like you just don't care as much about the NHL as you do the NFL. And so the odds and the lines are, can offer better value. And in these smaller tours throughout the year for cycling, you can get some really, really good value. But you're not going to get that value of the Tour de France, and you also lose. There's so much more risk involved in this tour just because the caliber was so high. So, that media attention, everyone had so much more information. It was just a really hard event to bet. So overall, good
Yeah,
learned.
and just
So move on.
I feel like that's a really good summary and kind of tied it back to like an idea we talked about before where like cycling betting pretty new and like pretty small betting pool, so as someone who's like really paying attention you have like the information advantage because you could be more tuned in than like the betting house. But in the tour it's kind of the opposite, like everyone's paying attention, a lot more money, a lot more media, and people really know what's going on, so you kind of lose that edge to an extent. So it's kind of like the opposite you'd expect, like oh man, the tour is happening, like there's way more betting opportunities, so it's a like better odds of kind of making money, but it's kind of like a different game when it's at that level of caliber. So,
Yeah, exactly.
hmm.
And uh, it, so what we're happy is learned a lot, and there's still a lot of exciting racing coming up. Tour de France Femmes, which is the women's edition, starts tomorrow. We can kind of touch on that briefly, which is the two main people are really short, so we didn't really bet overall. I think we might put down a little bit of money overall, but it's Vollering and Van Vleuten, who's going to be battling head to head. It's another one of those races where there's two top competitors. Kind of funny how it kind of spans across all kind of sectors of racing. And then there's the tour there, the Wallonie, which is like a Belgium-based tour that's kicking off, and that's smaller. So we're hopefully going to have some more luck there, but we'll see. We're still kicking around and love watching the bike race and love betting on it. We'll keep pumping out content on our site and offering odds and getting better at it and hopefully improving. I think one of the cool things that we're going to start doing is we're trying to generate a better time trial score for people. So PCS, which is Pro Cycling Stats, they offer stats on cycling. They kind of offer a score based on in certain categories on how well a rider does. But what we don't think they do is they don't think they like rate certain aspects of. They don't. So they just kind of like do it. They don't take into the year into account really. They also don't take into. So they give less points for national races, which makes sense because like a Canadian time trial, like if you win Canada's time trial, it's like not super good. Who gives? But if you win Belgium's time trial, yeah, that's super good. Just because like
Interesting.
cycling in Belgium is so important, and the caliber of riders is so high, but they weight those equally, which is like silly. It's like you should be giving someone who wins Belgium's time trial like a ton more points or whatever in their little system. So we think I think we've talked about this before. You can really make some money on time trial if you do your research and have an edge on that respect. Kind of find some people in the crowd who you might not think who actually do it really well. And so we kind of want to first we want to generate a trend line with respect to like are they trending in the right direction based on the year, and also we want to give that weighting a little bit. We want to change the weighting around a little bit, and so we've been playing around with that in terms of that's where we're starting. Obviously, we would kind of want to build models around everything. So you want to build models around teams and who's riding for who and all that jazz. So pay attention to the space if you're interested in that, and we'll kind of promote that on the website. But yeah, that's
That's
kind
one
of
second.
the
I want
summary.
to dig into that second. I think that's an interesting idea. So the idea is like betting house. They're also doing some modeling. They have these inputs. They kind of like come up with the result. Um, the stats website you mentioned is doing the same thing. But like in theory, if you're kind of more tuned in and you can develop better models that are on average predicting, I mean, more accurately than either of those parties, then that's like another edge you'd gain. Is that what we're talking about?
100%. Yeah, 100%. Long term, that sort of like we're in this thing for the long game. So we want to one day eventually just generate models that are extremely efficient and better than um, on average. On average, again,
Mm-hmm.
we're aiming to win 55% of the bets. So on average, we want it to be give us that kind of edge and be able to make consistent returns overall in the long term. I mean, it's a little tricky just in terms of scraping and all the jazz, and it's kind of a pain in the ass to be perfectly honest. But yeah, I think there's some like really cool things and thought provoking things we can dig into in another episode, or maybe a further down the line in terms of these models and where we can do that. But a lot of this stuff you can just to make your betting easier, right? Like you can just like look at a race and be like, okay, who's probably riding for the team? Like who's the GC rider? Like can that like just automatically show you on some dashboard? And then for the time trial day, can it like just like automatically show you who based on that new score, who's some good bets, who's some good
Yeah,
value.
yeah.
Like if we can just do that automatically, because like obviously there's some gut checking, but there's a lot of just like and then there's some things you forget, like we all live our daily lives and sometimes you have these maxims that are good maxims that you live by with respect to betting, but some days you forget them. You're like, and then you're like, oh yeah, I totally forgot. Like, some days like if someone's riding for the KOM jersey, they'll probably be too tired to actually win the stage because they need to win all these kind of hills in between. And then they won't actually have any energy left. But then you bet them because you're like, oh yeah, they're really good at climbing hilly stages. Uh, and then you're like, oh shit, forgot. Um, and so just to have that like taking out of the equation is something that we're really interested in building a dashboard. And so long term, that's kind of what we want to do.
Nice. Okay, two more questions for you. One is about the Tour de France Femme. I don't know much about it. Is it the same length and the same like course essentially as the Tour de France, or what's the differences?
No, it's a different course. So I think it's 9 stages, could be 8. And there's one-time trial. Yeah, I think on the second last day, and they have one really big hill, which is the Tourmalet. It's also often in the men's Tour de France, but yeah, completely different route. Obviously, they can't have as like they're introducing more hills for the women, which is great, and because it kind of develops a types of rider.
Mhm.
But they typically have slightly smaller hills and slightly shorter courses. You can read all about it in the book if you guys want. And yeah, it's a developing area, which is a lot of fun, and so there's a lot of value to be found. But again, you have to learn those riders, and so
Mhm.
figuring them out is a whole another ball game again. And who's riding for who? But again, I think the women's is super exciting because there's so many potential riders who are just like not known quite yet, and then they have like a breakthrough, and they're just like, oh, and then they're known about. But if you can figure out that person who's not known about prior to them having that big day, then you're in for a big one. So that's kind of fun, and if people want to dive in there, I'd recommend it because I think we should promote the women's sport more. And honestly,
Good.
it's really interesting to be fair. So it's like a compact version of the men's cycling some days. So
And seems like another opportunity where it's like getting less media attention, probably less, you know what I mean, like hyper focused stats and specific stats. Another opportunity where if someone's paying attention, they have an edge, unlike
yes,
the men's tour.
100%, you nailed it. And
Cool.
less. It's always. I mean, there's not much more to say to that, but it's also like negative in some respect because you might it's hard to get the information and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes to be able to do good bets and also like who's actually riding the race. It's just like it's harder just to get the information itself,
Yeah, fair.
to be perfectly honest. So just because it's so disparate
Mm-hmm.
and there's a dearth. So yeah.
Nice. And my last question was about the book you mentioned. I want to give you the opportunity to do a little plug. So I want to say, like, what inspired you to write the book, and like, who did you write it for? Like, who do you think would benefit from it, from reading it?
Yeah, 100%. And so the book was written to kind of break down the boundaries of watching cycling. We think it's a little gatekeepered at the moment by a bunch of people who kind of want to retain this like we think it's like chess. It's tricky to understand, and but once you kind of break in to watching it, it's super rewarding. We really recommend it. But it's not obviously not everyone has time to watch cycling, and not everyone has time to learn all about it instantaneously. But we hope that this guide is a good kind of way to break in. There's some really pretty diagrams that if you get tired of reading my writing or our writing, and then you want to just look at pictures. There's a lot of pictures in the book, and we hope to have many editions. So this is the first edition, but we're a big fan and believers of perfect being the enemy of the good. We think there's a lot of good content in there, and it's helpful for anyone who watches the races. There's a section on betting in it, but we're going to have a whole guide on betting that we'll be coming out with, which will be discrete from this book itself. We hope to have the second edition out next spring. So if you guys want to wait around to slightly more polished version, then sure, you can definitely wait around for that. But there's a ton of chapters in there. We can kind of um, there's talk about the Grand Tours, the all the races on the pro level calendar, the World Tour level calendar, how the women's racing works, mechanics around that, and then there's a whole section which is probably the most interesting for people who are betting, with respect to variables in the race itself. So we're
Mm-hmm.
talking road furniture, aerodynamics, team dynamics, descents, race organizers, how can they play into the race? How do they affect the outcome of the race? Freedom and leadership, altitude, rider type, sickness, age, living situation of the riders prior to races. So many of these variables. There's just countless. Well, there's not countless. It seems to be like 25 in the book, but all of these kind of affect the outcome of a race, and they could be interesting leverage points that you can think about prior to placing a
Mm-hmm.
bet. Um, and so you can kind of read about them, how they play into the race, how they affect the race, and hopefully that helps people enjoy the race, but also place better bets, and that's kind of our goal. We want to make the world of cycling more available than it is.
Very cool. Yeah, sounds like you're making the sport more accessible to people, both interested in just enjoying it and also interested in betting. So yeah, no, super cool.
Yeah. Thanks for thanks for allowing me to plug. It's available on Amazon. The title of the book, I have it up now, is The Ultimate Guide to Modern Cycling: Decoding Racing Tactics and Embracing the Spectator's Experience. It's currently discounted 35%. So if everyone wants to get on that and maybe purchase the book, leave a review. Doesn't have to be 5 stars. It's not necessarily 5 stars for everyone, but we're gonna try and improve it in the second edition, and also open to getting any feedback on the book itself. You can send an email to our work account, brent@procyclingbets.com. And yeah, that's it.
Super cool. I'm excited to get my hands on a copy. Audiobook following shortly, I hope.
Oh, audiobook. You don't think I bought this nice mic for just for these podcasts, Nick? No, we'll definitely have we'll definitely be reading this in an audiobook format. We'll also be doing a Kindle book format and potentially a hardcover, but probably the hardcover will land on the second edition. And so, yeah, it was a lot of fun to write. Was not written by ChatGPT; it was written by us. And so, yeah, it's, uh, it's all good.
Nice, man. Good stuff.
All right, thanks to Nick as well for coming on here talking to Tour de France us, and for everyone listening and who has listened thus far. Thanks. We've got some good feedback on the way things are going, and also just like our fan base is growing and everyone seems to be involved, and that's kind of what we want. We want to bring positivity to the internet and also positivity to cycling. So, cheers.